Yo, what is up, boys? That is your boy Zeddy here, back at it again to drop the movie of what if Deku was born with Mob's powers. Now, this is going to be incorporating the finale of the video in it, just so, some of you guys who I know usually don't click on these movies can, be brought over here. That being said, make sure you guys go over there, get your snacks, your popcorns, get something to drink, tell a friend to tell another friend, and make sure to go subscribe to the new Akatsuki channel that me, Rogex, Izukage, and Phoenix Sonin are in. And with that being said, just sit back and enjoy the What If movie. And with that being said, it has been your boy Zether, and let's just go ahead and get started. Okay, so this story will actually all start off when Deku's born. This version of Deku is going to be looking exactly like Deku, and in this time, I'm not actually going to make Deku look like Mob, but he is going to look like just regular old Izuku. So, with that being said though, this version of Deku will be Mob's reincarnation, but he will not be getting any of Mob's memories anytime soon. Or actually at all in the series. He's never going to get any of those memories from his previous life. And let's just say Deku just goes through his life like a normal kid. We're just going to skip over to the day when Deku's about, 1 year old, okay? He just turned 1. He just learned how to walk. And it's actually on this particular day that Deku would actually just be walking around with his mom holding her hand. I don't even know if babies can walk at the age of 1, but I'm pretty sure they can. Come on now. Like, you're 1 year old, learn to walk already. Okay, but seriously though, Deku would basically just be with his mother Inko as, they're basically walking through the grocery store, the convenience store. As Inko's basically just grabbing her groceries, and this when some man with like a hooded figure would walk in out of nowhere and just begin to walk real close to Inko, as Inko just kind of ignores it. She thinks that, maybe he's just, he doesn't really have much and he just comes out like this. And Inko just doesn't really worry too much about it as she proceeds to, pick out her little lemons and oranges and all that stuff. She's in like the vegetables section, right? Or the, the fruit and vegetable section, right? As, the man basically walks over to Deku, and before Inko has any time to react, the man would immediately grab Deku and proceed to run out of the door. As Deku would immediately start crying. His cries would begin to shake the entirety of the store, and the man holding Deku would begin to say, "What? What is this?" As Deku's eyes would immediately glow white, and this is when the man would literally just be thrown like straight crashing into a wall, as Deku would just begin to float and his eyes would just be glowing white. As this is when Inko would proceed to basically run over to Izuku and hug him as he begins to cry like a normal baby. And this is when Deku would finally realize what everything is, or not even Deku, but Inko would finally realize the extent of Deku's powers. During the next couple of years, Inko would take Deku to the Quirk examination place, and they would tell Inko that he is born quirkless. She would say, "No, he's not. I swear. He has like a stronger version of my quirk. I saw it with my own eyes." And the doctors would just all tell her that she's pretty much crazy, with Inko just going home with her kid, that being Izuku, and just basically not having the answer she was searching for. Deku would basically go home with Inko, and for the next couple of years until Deku was about 4 years old, when he finally understands what's going on around him, Deku's telekinetic abilities and his just weird psychic powers just start getting stronger and stronger as the years progress. He would start breaking spoons and plates and just start having weird occurrences and anomalies going on in the house. As Inko, by the time that Deku was 4 years old, had pretty much just gotten used to it, and Deku would always apologize for the things that he would do. However, it's at this point that Inko would basically try to teach Deku how to use his powers, and Deku would basically look at his mother's quirk as an example. He would think that his powers are just telekinesis abilities, and he would go through his normal day-to-day life with just that. Now it's at this point that Bakugo would pretty much unlock his explosion quirk, and Deku would be extremely tempted to show the class that he has a quirk of his own. He has telekinetic powers. But, for some reason, his mother just doesn't want him to tell anybody what his powers are. And she just doesn't want Deku to basically show them off or, use them for any selfish purposes. If he wants to become a hero someday in the future, she would love that and she would support him all the way. But to just flash her quirk for attention, Deku would be raised the right way and Deku would never show off his quirk. When people would ask Deku if he has one, he would say he does, but he would never show it. So people would believe that Deku's just born quirkless and they would all just basically make fun of him and pick on him. But Deku wouldn't really mind too much. He would always just think in the back of his head that his powers are not meant to hurt other people. His powers are not meant to hurt other people. He would always just think that in his mind. As Bakugo through the years would begin to get rougher and rougher with Deku, telling him to finally show his quirk off someday. Come on, Deku, show that power of yours. Do it. As Deku would just refuse. Deku in this version is not actually going to have Mob's personality of being like a really shy kid. Deku's still going to love heroes and have that normal personality, but he just refuses to use his powers due to the fact that nobody needs saving. There's no real reason for Deku to do that. So, of course, Deku would proceed to basically just go through life like usual, and this is when we're actually going to have a time skip to the day of the Sludge villain incident. The teacher would, of course, walk in through the door, and he would begin to say, well, it's about time that you guys all started thinking about your futures. And he would then proceed to look at the class as he picks up his glasses, doing that usual anime thing, that Kabuto thing, if you guys know what I mean, as he'd proceed to say, just kidding. I know you all want to become heroes! As he would throw the papers in the air and all of the kids would start flashing their powers. Some of them would look towards Deku's direction to see if he was finally showing his off. And Deku would just be sitting there, putting his books in his bag. As class would pretty much end, and this is when Bakugo and his goons would walk up to Deku. As Bakugo would end up grabbing Deku's, his book, and he would end up essentially just throwing it out as he would explode it. Now, this would actually cause Deku's anger meter to go up to 50%, as Deku would essentially just tell Bakugo that that's not nice, and he would end up going off of the roof. Just basically going off to get it. As Bakugo would tell him the same thing that he had done in canon, that being, why don't you take a swan dive off the roof? With Deku basically just ignoring it and going to get his book, just thinking that powers aren't made to hurt others. Powers aren't made to hurt others. Just thinking that constantly, as the meter would go up to about 67% after what Bakugo had said with the swan dive stuff. As Deku would proceed to basically just be trying his absolute hardest to not, give Bakugo the attention that he wants. Deku would be trying his absolute hardest not to give Bakugo that satisfaction of letting himself be looked at as if, he failed and he lost. He just doesn't want to give off that vibe. So, of course, Deku would proceed to basically just walk off home. As Deku would be walking off home, he would actually just basically go under an alleyway where he would actually sense an ominous presence. Now, as Deku would be walking home, he'd basically just be putting his book in his bag, and this is when the Sludge villain would jump in out of nowhere from the sewers, as Deku would immediately turn around, and he would see that the Sludge villain would jump on top of his body as Deku would start suffocating, and he would lose his ability to breathe, as Deku would begin to think whether this is a good situation to use his abilities. As the Sludge villain would then say, give me your body, kid. You're my hero. As Deku would then say, this is the villain. Mom said I can use my powers to be a hero, so this must be right. As he would immediately wave his hand and the Sludge villain would get off of Deku immediately. As Deku would levitate it, and he would then have a bottle coming out of nowhere. As Deku would shove the Sludge villain inside of it, and this is when All Might would appear. As Deku at this point would be holding the Sludge villain up, as All Might would basically come in and drop in as he would say hello. As he would say, wow, looks like you captured this villain all by your own. Deku would turn around slowly as he would say, All Might, it's you. Can I get an autograph? Please, I have all your books. I'm your biggest fan. As All Might would basically say, ha 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 ha. Sure, kid. As he would sign Deku's book, and All Might would grab the Sludge villain as he jumps off. Now, this version of Deku's not going to grab onto All Might's leg due to the fact that he has a quirk. I think maybe, he might have thought about it, but, he wouldn't end up doing it just due to the fact that he actually has a quirk and he thinks he can become a hero. His mother told him that, and that's all the reassurance that he needs. I feel like if the Anko version in My Hero Academia, the normal one, would have had that confidence in Deku, maybe Deku might not have turned out the way he did. But yeah, Deku might have not turned out the way that he did. Anyways, That being said, though, however, I feel like after this, All Might would still proceed to drop the Sludge villain due to his own clumsiness. And just from looking at those cargo pants, yeah, that thing was gonna fall. Anyways, let's just say that All Might had a hole in them, right? And the Sludge villain bottle just went out. And, you know, Bakugo would, of course, be caught up just like the version of Bakugo was in the original. He would end up being caught by the Sludge villain and the explosions would go off, to which Deku would be walking in that direction unknowingly. This version would still basically be having, you know, his, would basically be walking there subconsciously without even knowing it. But Deku would be smiling the whole time as he's looking at the book that's signed. He would just be so happy. His idol, he had just met his idol and gotten his signature. He's just extremely excited. Deku, as soon as he hears the explosions, would run towards that direction and he'd ask what's going on, as people would say that the heroes can't save that kid. He's gonna die if nobody steps in. As Deku would look at Bakugo's eyes and Bakugo would give him that stare that he had done in canon. As Deku would in an instant point his hand at the Sludge villain and get it off of Bakugo. As Deku would basically snap his fingers and the Sludge villain would go into nothingness. Deku would have teleported the Sludge villain right into the police station, and after this Deku would run straight in through the crowd as nobody had actually seen what Deku had done. He would run up to Bakugo and ask him if he's okay. As Bakugo would basically look at Deku and say, "I'm fine, get off of me." As he wouldn't even know Deku was the one who saved him, so he would then say, "I took that care of that thing all by myself." As Deku would say, "Yeah, you did, Bakugo." And this is when All Might would arrive and the heroes would basically scold Deku for jumping into harm's way. Deku would basically proceed to smile after everything, and the only person who would have seen what Deku had done was All Might. After all was said and done and Deku was walking home, All Might would have followed this version of Deku and he would have basically ended up explaining what One For All is to him. Of course, this version of Deku doesn't necessarily need One For All, but after All Might has studied Deku's body and just looked at his build, All Might would have decided that, yeah, this kid definitely needs a little bit of training. So we're going to have a little bit of Mob Psycho training montage for the next 10 months. Deku would spend these next 10 months training with All Might just due to the fact that this version of Deku was even more flimsier than the original one. And Deku would end up getting about pretty ripped by the end of everything. He was able to, you know, this version of Deku has the same motivation, and seeing as he's training with All Might, he definitely would have been able to accomplish his goals. And since he doesn't have Mob's personality per se, he just has the lock with him using his abilities to harm others on it. That's pretty much the only thing that he ended up gaining from having Mob's powers. So yeah, Deku would train with All Might every day for 10 months and he would end up getting pretty ripped after everything. Deku's, in terms of his abilities and powers, would have never actually had to essentially train them. And at this point, Deku's anger would be at about 76%. He still wouldn't have snapped. So yeah, let's just skip over to the day of the entrance exam. Deku would be walking in as he's basically just thinking the same things that our original Deku would, and this is when Deku would proceed to end up bumping into Uraraka, and she would catch him and use her zero gravity quirk on him, as, you know, she would catch him before he could fall and say, "Hey, sorry I used my quirk on you, it would just be bad luck if you were to fall before the entrance exam." As Deku would look at her and he would begin to blush, as yeah, this version of Deku still hasn't talked to girls either, and the same situation would go down. Now, in terms of going inside of the you know, taking the written exam, Ida would still clown this man Deku, and Deku would still end up being a little ashamed after what Ida says to him. So Deku would proceed to basically finish up the test, getting a perfect score, since this version of Deku is even more intelligent than our original canon, seeing as he was a little frailer. So guess what he was doing while he wasn't, you know, doing our original Deku did? He was studying. So yeah, this version of Deku is even smarter, and not this version of studying, but, you know, usual study, like normal studying, right? But anyways, that aside, Deku would be even smarter, and he would walk outside as he was actually the first one to complete his test. Bakugo would have looked at Deku after that and he would have just been thinking nerd, as he would have finished his test, and Deku would be outside in the training grounds just basically ready to take the exam. He'd be doing some squats and just some stretches, as, you know, Ida would walk up to him and say, "Hey, stop that, you're being very distracting to the other participants." As Deku would look towards Ida and he would say, "Huh? Oh, sorry about that, I didn't mean to distract people. I'm just getting in some stretches before the exam, you know, just trying to get loose." as Ida would say, "You are a major distraction, problem child," as he would walk away from Deku and his anger meter would go up to an 80%. As Deku would proceed to basically just think nothing of it, and President Mike would come on the speakers basically saying that they gotta go, 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 there's no countdowns in a real battle. As Deku would use his abilities to levitate off the ground, he would proceed to basically just look around at the robots, as, you know, he would basically just walk around. Actually, no, retcon that. As soon as President Mike says go, Deku would like look around and everybody as they're all gone, and Deku would begin to basically just run off looking for robots without using his quirk whatsoever. He would be running around, kind of like stumbling around, just looking for any robots that he could find. But anytime that he would seek or come across one, they would all just get destroyed by everyone else. So his anger meter would go up by 2%. This meaning he's at 82 now. And Deku would then proceed to basically just look around for robots. As like basically there was about 2 minutes left in terms of the exam, Deku would still be at 0 points, and he would basically just be looking around looking for anything that he could find, until finally a robot would come in front of him, and it would actually be a 3-pointer, as Deku would use his abilities to levitate it and crush it onto the ground. As Deku would proceed to basically run around and find like 3 other robots, and all of them were 3-pointers that he was destroying. So at this point, it's 3 times 4, so 16 points. Yeah, 16 points in terms of robot points. And this is when Deku would continue running around just trying to find any robots at all, as he would see a kid with an engine quirk, or that blue-haired boy, this being Ida, destroying robots with his amazing power. Deku would think that, you know, those powers like that are just so flashy and incredible. You know, he wishes maybe he was born with something like that, but he'll make the most out of his abilities, because it's better to have a quirk at all than to be born quirkless. As Deku would look around, but he would notice that there's no robots at all in his direction. As out of nowhere, the ground would begin to shake and the 0-pointer would be let loose. As everybody would run away, Deku would notice that there's a girl underneath some rubble, as he would begin to immediately run that way, saying, "Hey, get up, come on, we gotta go, that 0-pointer's coming." As Uraraka would say, "Help, I'm stuck." As Deku would run towards her direction and say, "Don't worry about it, I got you." As he would pick up the rubble off of her, and right as he was about to take all of it off and they were about to go off running, the 0-pointer would step on them. Or so it seems. Deku's hand would be waved up as he would stop the 0-pointer's leg before it could crush them. Deku would begin to basically, you know, just wave his arm, and the 0-pointer's leg would just come flinging off. As Deku would then proceed to basically look at the sludge, no, not the sludge one, but the 0-pointer, and go flick his fingers, as in an instant, the sludge villain was gone. It had gone into nothingness, and Nezu would just be shocked, as immediately he would take down Izuku's name and immediately pass that kid after seeing what he had done to the 0-pointer. After this, Deku would proceed to basically just save Uraraka, taking her to Recovery Girl, and this version of Deku would actually take down Uraraka's number. After she had offered that to him, Deku would take out his phone and he would take down her number. As Deku would just be silent the whole time, still in disbelief that he had saved somebody, and Deku would go home. The next couple of days would go by and Deku would get his acceptance letter, and this time, instead of All Might being the one who tells him anything, it'd be Principal Nezu who tells him that he would love to meet him one day before UA starts. As the day would actually come the next day, and Deku would report to Nezu's office. As Nezu would be sitting there, he'd begin to ask Deku what his powers are, seeing as he saw what Deku had done, but on the list it had actually shown quirkless, so he's actually kind of confused in terms of how Deku was able to do what he had done. Deku would look at Nezu and tell him that his powers are quirk that he thinks can't be, you know, examined or looked at this current point in time. Maybe once technology gets better, they can finally understand his powers, but for now, there's no real way for Deku to, you know, be able to understand his powers, seeing as, you know, he just can't right now. And yeah, that would basically lead Deku into talking to Nezu for a little bit, and Nezu would tell Deku that nonetheless, he's impressed with his power, and he's actually going to go into UA with a scholarship. He's very impressed with Deku's potential, and he hopes that Deku will reach his, you know, his fullest potential here, being a student at UA. As Deku would smile towards Nezu's direction, he would basically look at Nezu, and well, Nezu would look at him as he would smile, and this is when Deku would proceed to basically walk away. As, you know, the very next day of school would come in, Deku would walk into class, as he would look around, and this is when he would notice the boy with the blue hair and Bakugo arguing. as immediately Ida would stop his jibber jabber and he would look immediately at Deku, as he would basically just do a little bit of a bow in front of him and say, "I'm sorry. You are a far superior student to me. Your powers are incredible." As after hearing that, Bakugo would say, "Powers? What powers? That numbskull is quirkless. What are you talking about?" And Ida would look at Bakugo as he would say, "You didn't see what that kid did? He took out a whole 0-pointer in an instant." As Bakugo would look at Deku and he would immediately stand up. And right before he could even get the chance to go up to Deku, a brown-haired girl would approach him from behind. And right as that happened, simultaneously, Aizawa would get up as he would say, "If you're here to make friends, I suggest you leave now." Just doing his usual Aizawa stuff. But yeah, Aizawa would basically proceed to look at Deku and just say, "Okay, get dressed up in these and meet me outside." As everybody would go outside and they would all just basically just be getting ready for Aizawa's instructions. Now, inside of the locker room, Deku wasn't told anything, which is why I skipped it, since this version of Deku isn't built like a Greek god like most of my other Dekus. So yeah, they'd go outside, and this is when Aizawa would actually toss the ball over to Deku, since he actually got the most impressive markings. He had 16 points plus 80 rescue points, seeing as he handled the situation flawlessly. So yeah, Deku would be granted 80 rescue points plus 16, getting a total score of 96 points. And Deku would be tossed the ball as Bakugo would immediately just cross his arms as he looks attentively at Deku. Deku would proceed to basically just reel his arm back as he throws it in a really weak fashion. And Aizawa would then look at Deku as he asked him why he didn't use his powers. Deku would say that he doesn't really like using his abilities if, there's no villains. He doesn't like using them for just things like this. As Aizawa would tell Deku to use his powers now, and that it's not something that he has a choice. He's ordering him. Deku would proceed to look towards Aizawa as he's tossed another ball, and in an instant, Deku would basically just catch it, but before he can, he would just aim his pointer finger at it as he would then reel it back and toss it up into the skies. He would proceed to get a score of infinity. Bakugo would immediately, after seeing that, would proceed to basically run at Deku as he would say, "Deku, how long were you hiding this from me?" And Deku would proceed to basically just hold his hands up in front of him as he's getting ready to dodge the hit, take the hit. Aizawa would grab Bakugo with the scarf and he would say, "One more outburst like that, and I will expel you before you get the chance to breathe." And Bakugo would basically calm himself down. As for the rest of the stuff that Deku can use his telekinetic abilities for, Deku would ace the whole thing in its whole entirety, and Deku would just destroy each and every single aspect of the thing. In terms of the grip string test, Deku would use his telekinetic abilities to just crush the thing. The race, Deku would blitz over there and just teleport, and yeah, Deku would get an incredible score in terms of his points. Deku would actually get first place with the rest of the order going as it did in canon. Just, Deku first, and whoever was first now is second, and you guys get the point. But yeah, that's pretty much how the Quirk exam basically goes in this version of events. Okay, so where the second part's all going to start off is right after Deku had basically done great in the Quirk assessment. He had basically just done great, and everybody was basically looking at him like his power was incredibly amazing. Deku would basically be thinking to himself whether that was the right way to use his powers and whether his mom would have, been happy with that. I mean, yeah, sure, he has great powers and a lot of potential, but he doesn't know if it was a great thing to use it just to pass a little Quirk assessment. I mean, if he didn't, he was gonna fail out of UA, but, was that really the right way to use his powers? He'd basically just shrug it off as he would proceed to basically walk home, and this is when Bakugo would come in from behind. As he would be about halfway home, Bakugo would essentially just look at Deku and he would say, "Hey, Deku, what was that? What were those powers? I thought you were quirkless." As Deku would look at Bakugo, he would tell him he's not quirkless. He just never used his quirk in a flashy way because his mom always told him that, he's never supposed to just show it off. He's only supposed to use it for good. As Bakugo would say, "Good? So you decided to just let me mess with you all those years for no reason? You could have done something about it. You could have maybe pushed me even harder than I already was. But instead, you decided to hide this secret from me. Why? Did you always think you were better than me or something? Did you think you were stronger than me?" As Deku would look at Bakugo, he would say, No, Bakugo, it's nothing like that. That's not at all what I was thinking. I just didn't want to use my As Bakugo would shoot an explosion at Deku's face, sending him crashing into a building. Deku would get back up as Bakugo would then look at him and say, well, this time you're not getting out of it so easy. As he would go, ah! And launch an explosion right at Deku. Deku would basically use his psychic powers to push Bakugo back and just keep him from hurting himself. As basically Deku would continue walking home, as Bakugo just trying to launch attacks at Deku. Deku would be paying no mind to Bakugo, which would anger him more and more. And Bakugo, after about 5 minutes and Deku was outside his house, he decided to walk home and just basically train for the rest of the day. As Deku would walk inside and he would basically proceed to ask his mother if, well, what he's doing is right. He's not using his powers to be a show off or anything, and things seem to be working out, but Bakugo doesn't like that. Inko would proceed to tell Deku that yeah, he's doing the right thing, as she would proceed to tell Deku as that he's doing everything right. If he got first place, he must be doing something well. As Deku would say yeah, but it feels a little different. And Inko would tell him that it's all right, like he's doing the best he can, And Inko at this point doesn't know that Deku is limiting himself so much. When she told him not to use his powers for flashiness, she didn't mean never use them. She just basically meant not to try to be like Bakugo. She didn't want Deku to feel overconfident because of those amazing powers of his, and she didn't want Deku to go down the wrong path. She always wanted him to be a genuine hero, and that's what he is. He's a genuine kid with a pure heart and, well, an amazing goal to become the #1 hero. She would not know that Deku's limiting himself so much and that this is causing that much of a problem for him. If she did, she'd probably tell Deku not to do that anymore, to use his powers the way that he sees fit. But like I said, she doesn't know. So yeah, Deku would proceed to basically go to sleep, and the very next day he would wake up for a normal day of school. That day there would pretty much be no real anything going on in that day, so we're just gonna skip on over to the day of the heroes versus villains thing, where they're all basically on their last class, and this is when Aizawa would basically just be on the board telling them to get ready because someone's gonna walk in through that door soon. This is when All Might would basically bust in through the door saying, I am here, walking in like a normal person, as Deku would look at All Might and he would immediately begin to fanboy his ASS off, as he would look towards All Might and say, All Might, it's you. All Might would look at him and say, ah, yes, I remember you, young man. You were the young man who helped me, take away the Sludge villain. I appreciate you. As he'd basically look at the rest of the class and tell them all that, they all need to get suited up because the clothes make the pros. As they would all get all suited up, and the little background music would start playing. My hero. That stuff. That was a little cringe, but whatever. Anyways, that being said, Deku would proceed to essentially just get changed, as he would walk outside, and his outfit would be the same one that he would worn in canon. His mother would have still made him that same outfit, and Deku would of course still be paired up with Uraraka against Bakugo and Ida. All Might wouldn't really know about the tension that's going on between the both of them, since he wasn't there the day before, and All Might had given one for all to Mirio instead of Deku, seeing as he trained him. But yeah, Deku is about the same physical level that he was in the original, so as soon as everything gets started, Deku would basically make the same plan with Uraraka, and he would still end up slamming Bakugo onto the ground just like he had done in canon, catching Bakugo off guard because his rage was blinding him from making some smart decisions. After that, Bakugo would get up and launch an explosion at Deku, as Uraraka would have basically just been looking for the bomb. As Deku would proceed to basically start dodging, he would begin to get very hard for him to dodge Bakugo's attacks, as he would decide that this is not the time and place to use his abilities. There's no real danger, and this is just a little test. It's not going to affect him in any way. So he would just be using nothing but his physical strength, and that would do horrible things. He would proceed to get bodied by Bakugo, as Bakugo would be launching explosions upon explosions on him, saying, well, you've been hiding from me all these years? You think you're better than me, Deku? Well, no. You're done for! As he would proceed to shoot a bunch of explosions at Deku's body, tearing up his suit, and All Might would have to yell through the commission thing to tell him that he needs to stop right now. He's being way too aggressive for just a little exam. As Bakugo would crush the device in his ear, he would look towards Deku and say that, all these years you were looking down on me as if I was some sort of ant. I thought you were weak, but look at you. You were ridiculing me behind my back, weren't you, Deku? As Deku would look at Bakugo, he'd proceed to say that, no, he wasn't. As Bakugo would look at him and say, "Say goodnight, Deku." He'd proceed to pull the pin on his explosion gauntlet, and he would shoot that straight at Deku, sending him crashing into the wall, knocking him out. And All Might would proceed to bust in through the building as he would restrain Bakugo and knock him out, as he would proceed to run over to Uraraka and call off everything. He would tell Ida to call everything off, as the day would pretty much end there, and All Might would say that, the class is over, class is dismissed. The rest of them can have this portion tomorrow, but in terms of Bakugo, he needs to be dealt with accordingly. As he would take Bakugo to the principal's office, and Nezu and All Might would discuss everything with Bakugo. Bakugo at this point would still be raging and just basically angry, as at this point his rage is just blinding him. He doesn't see things clearly. He's saying everything in black and white when in reality it's gray. He doesn't know the full story of why Deku's the way he is, and he would proceed to basically get expelled from UA. Bakugo would walk into the building with Nezu, as Nezu would ask him why he did what he did. Bakugo would proceed to say that quirkless Deku didn't show him the power that he had, and he thought that maybe if he went all out on him, he would be tempted to use the power just to defend himself. With Nezu saying that he understands that, maybe he has some rage or some issues with Deku outside of school, but he can't be doing that to other students. What if that blast would have killed him? What would have happened then, huh? As Bakugo would sit there in silence, basically not saying anything, Nezu would proceed to look at Bakugo as he would say that he can't have anybody like that in his school. He might as well be a villain if he keeps going down this path, so he's going to be expelling Bakugo. And Bakugo would proceed to basically widen his eyes, as Mitsuki would be called in 30 minutes later, and she would hear what Bakugo had done, and she would get enraged at Bakugo. She would say that that was incredibly awful thing to do to Deku. Isn't that your childhood friend? She would say. You're supposed to be friends with that kid, not just acting as if he's some nobody who just gets to get pushed around by you. You have to treat him with more respect, Bakugo. As Bakugo would look at his mom and scoff as he's angry, and he runs out of the room saying, "Whatever, I don't need the school anyways. I'll become a hero another way. And if I can't do that, then we'll get there when we get to that bridge." Bakugo would leave the school, and at this point we would switch over to Deku's perspective, as he's in Recovery Girl's office, and he would essentially just be laying down there. As he would look towards her and ask her what happened, she would explain the situation to Deku, and Deku would just be thinking that he hopes Bakugo doesn't get expelled. If he would have just used his powers, maybe this outcome would have been differently. Maybe Bakugo wouldn't have gotten expelled at all, and maybe they could have been on equal terms or something. But Deku just lays down as he heals up for the next couple of hours and then goes home. Very next day, Deku would walk into class as Bakugo was nowhere to be seen, and he wondered if maybe he got suspended or, in school detention. As Deku would think nothing of it, and days would go by and Bakugo would just not come to school. At this point, Bakugo had basically just been trying to get into other schools, but no other school would accept him. They heard about what happened in UA, and none of them want somebody who acts like that in their hero course. That wouldn't represent a good image on them. So Bakugo would just be stuck without any hero school. Deku would go into the office on the same day, and he would ask Principal Nezu what happened, as Nezu would look at Deku and say, "Ah, yes, Midoriya, have a seat." As Deku would have a seat and ask Nezu what happened with Bakugo. Did he get suspended for like a long time or something? As Nezu would say, "Oh yes, Bakugo, yeah, we expelled him. After what happened in the Heroes versus Villains, we decided that it was in our best interest to get him out of here, since he was just not a great fit for UA." As Deku would immediately be shocked, he would say that it was his fault, that Bakugo should be let back in. Bakugo was just angry at Deku, and if Deku would have just showed off his quirk, maybe all of this could have been avoided. As Nezu would proceed to essentially just tell Deku that, well, if he would have calmed down and actually showed real hero behavior, he would have not been expelled from the school. There's nothing he can do about it. And Deku would look at Nezu as he would say he understands, but just to please take this into consideration. Principal Nezu would sit there in silence after hearing the kid who pretty much got destroyed by him stand up on Bakugo's behalf. He would think that that kid is really something if he's willing to, stand up for the same kid who hurt him the way he did. As Nezu would take it into consideration that maybe Bakugo should be let back in, but, that's going to come to another, situation when we come to it. I'm going to be posting a poll same day that this video comes out, the same hour, hopefully, if I'm not too busy. Yeah, the same hour. Yeah, I should be able to do that. And I'm basically just going to be asking you guys, do you guys want me to go down the villain route with Bakugo, with him basically just saying enough is enough, and just going with the League of Villains and being present in the USJ attack? Or do you guys want me to essentially have him just pretty much what's it called? Just pretty much go back to school and be let back in for the USJ? Or after the USJ, actually. Yeah, it would be for the sports festival. Or no, Bakugo wouldn't even be let into the sports festival after what he did as a punishment. Basically, take a vote in the community tab below after you see this video. And yeah, let me know what you guys think. Should Bakugo be let back in? Or should I permanently expel him and make him a villain that Deku has to face later on? Whichever one you guys choose, I'm going to be happy to do that situation. But with that being said, Deku would walk out of the building with Nezu, and he would proceed to go to his classes. As this is when Deku would walk up to Uraraka, and she would say, "Hey Deku, I'm glad to see you. How are you feeling after what happened with Bakugo? Sorry I haven't mentioned it. I just didn't want to, I'll talk about that anytime soon after it happened." As Deku would look at Uraraka, he would say that he was actually fine. As Uraraka would basically look at Deku and say, "Great. Well, Deku, do you maybe want to hang out after school today?" As Deku would look at Uraraka and say, sure, what do you have in mind? Uraraka would immediately go red after she realized what she asked Deku, and she would run out of the room as Deku just left there speechless, kind of like, what just happened? Deku would continue with the rest of the class, and at the end of the day, Uraraka would basically walk up to Deku and she says sorry that she freaked out, she just got a little nervous, she's never actually gone out with another guy before. As Deku would say that, oh, it's completely fine, and he would start chuckling saying that, yeah, he knows that feeling. When he first talked to her and he stayed silent, it was because, she's kind of one of the first girls he's ever talked to. Uraraka would laugh at that and she would say, "So, Deku, want to go get a bite to eat after school? Maybe let's go to the mall." As Deku would agree to that, and after this, they would both basically walk to the mall after school in their school uniforms. As soon as they would take a couple steps in the mall, a couple people would walk up to them as they would say, "Hey, you guys are UA students, right? You guys attend a prestigious school, right? How is it? Is it true that All Might works there?" They'd begin to ask them stuff, and Deku and Uraraka would basically just answer some questions and ignore them. After a little bit of time, they would both decide that, yeah, they're gonna have to basically try to be a little low-key. As they would take off their school jackets, and they would both just be wearing like a white shirt under that. Uraraka would be wearing like a crop top or whatever, and Deku would be wearing just a nice little white t-shirt, right? It makes his body look a little decent since, at this point Deku has been training a little more and he's pretty ripped. And in terms of his haircut, this man, he ain't slacking. This version of Deku's hair isn't long and nappy like the normal one, and it's actually more maintained and done. And Deku is also wearing a watch as well as a pair of white shoes. Deku would be walking with Uraraka, and she would just be looking at him, just like staring at him in a different way than she usually does. As her eyes, like her face would go red, and Deku would ask her what's wrong. And she would say, "It's nothing," and she'd proceed to try to run away. But Deku would grab her by like the hand and ask her if she's okay. Does she have a fever or something? He would put his hand on her head as he'd proceed to basically heal her, and all of like the stress that she had and like all the negative energy just gone. She'd proceed to just be a light of positivity, and she'd say, "Hey Deku, wanna go grab a pretzel?" As Deku would look at her and say, "Sure." As they'd basically go over to Retzel's Pretzels, if you guys know where that is, and they'd basically proceed to just get some pretzels. Deku would get my favorite, which is, the pepperoni with, the pepperoni pretzel, and Uraraka would get some Cinnabits. As she would basically proceed to just walk around with Deku for the mall a little longer. As they're basically walking around, some guys would walk up to them as, they'd walk up to Uraraka and begin to just say that, she actually looks kind of cute. As they'd start to follow Deku and Uraraka, who are walking with each other, and they would ask her if, they're on a date, which Uraraka would say no, they're not. And one of the guys would actually say that's perfect, as he'd wrap his arm around Uraraka. This would kind of anger Deku, but he'd kind of just not really say anything. As he'd continue to walk, and those three guys are basically just walking with Deku, as they're all essentially just pushing him to the back, and Deku's, his time with his friend is just being ruined. Or that's how Deku's looking at it. He doesn't really have a crush on her at this point, but something about it just making him jealous. Deku would proceed to basically wave his hand at the kids as he'd say, hey guys, I'm kind of here with my friend. Is it okay if you guys like let us, just hang out together? As they would say, what, you got a crush on her or something? Too late, man. You lost your chance. You should have maybe called this a date and maybe we would have left. As Deku would basically just kind of stay silent, he'd proceed to look at the kids as he would just say, yeah. And Uraraka would basically proceed to look at the three of them and she'd get angry and say, hey, he asked you guys to go. I'm not interested, okay? As they'd look at her and they'd say, come on. As they start surrounding her, immediately as Deku sees what's going on, he'd stop time. As he would just push those kids aside and he'd tell Uraraka to just walk away. As she would ask him what's going on, everybody's standing still. As Deku would say that he stopped time for them to just basically just be left behind and them to enjoy the rest of their day. As Uraraka would smile and say that that's perfect. As Deku would look at her and say, yeah, a little some. As they'd proceed to finish up their day at the mall, and this is when they would walk to Deku's house. As Deku would basically ask her if she's hungry and she basically comes over for dinner. She's not trying to have a little ramen cup today. She wants to have real food. So, she goes to Deku's house and meets Inko. As Inko immediately after seeing Uraraka would say, hey, so you're Deku's little special lady. As Deku would look at his mom and say, no, mom, this is just a friend. As she'd say, that's how it starts. I remember how me and your father were. As Uraraka's face would go red and she'd say, see, she got it for you. As Uraraka would basically just look at Deku's mom and just be bright red in the face. As Deku would ask her if she's okay, maybe she has a fever again. Deku's mom would just kind of face palm and say, no, she'd just stay quiet. And she'd look towards Uraraka's direction and she would say, if you want to date my son, just be super sweet to him. He'll start liking you back. Don't worry. As Uraraka would get even more red and she'd say, I gotta go. After, eating the rest of her food, Deku would ask her if she wants him to walk him home. And Deku would proceed to basically just say, okay, Uraraka, well, have a good day. As Uraraka would proceed to basically leave the house, Deku would look at his mom and say that was pretty strange. She wasn't acting like that before. As Deku's mom or Inko would look at him and say, yeah, girl stuff. As Deku would say, okay. This would basically lead into Deku essentially getting a text from All Might and meeting All Might at the beach. As he would begin to explain to Deku that he's sorry he hasn't been talking to him that much, but he was basically just keeping up with his stuff at school. He's a little busy and his hero work stuff is kind of hard to keep up with. As he would ask Deku, how's he doing? As Deku would say, honestly, I don't know. I mean, I thought that maybe Bakugo would get suspended or a couple of days away from school, but I didn't expect for him to get expelled. I kind of feel like it was my fault. As All Might would look at Deku and just see that Deku's actually feeling bad, he would look towards him as he would say, I'll try to talk to Principal Nezu as soon as I can, but in terms of what Bakugo did, he kind of got what he deserved. I mean, what he did to you was pretty unacceptable, and anybody at UA should not behave that way. As Deku would say that he understands, but maybe it was his fault a little bit. He always did hide his powers from him, and Bakugo probably just felt as if, he felt he was better than him or something. As All Might would listen to this, and he would then proceed to tell Deku not to worry about it, that he'll talk to Principal Nezu. Deku would look at All Might and thank him for that, and he would then begin to look at him like, as he would say, All Might, I appreciate everything you've done for me. You took me from being a scrawny kid who honestly couldn't even lift up a 5-pound weight to now being pretty confident in myself, and now I have a lot more friends than I did before you were ever around. Thank you, All Might. As All Might would look at Deku, and this is where I'm going to be ending off. Okay, so where we basically left off last was All Might and Deku were talking at Dagoma Beach. Now, All Might would proceed to essentially go over to Nezu's office and he would begin to have a talk with Nezu. See, a lot of you guys in the comment section said Deku should become a villain because it would add more depth to the story. And while I do agree with that, I did put the community tab and asked you guys whether Bakugo should or shouldn't be allowed back into UA. And it's a majority, guys. I don't know. Like, at first coming into the video, I was going to make him a villain, but I just can't do it. I can't bring myself to make Bakugo a villain, knowing that a lot of the more people will probably dislike it if I make him not a villain. So I don't know. Your boy Zedder's left with the dilemma of make more people angry and have a lot of people who wanted that happy, or make, other people angry and have other people happy. So at this point, majority won, and now I'm just kind of gonna stick with what I said already. I'm just gonna basically go with the notion that Bakugo should be let back into UA, seeing as 2.7k people voted. I feel like it's only right that I give the people who voted for them yes to, be allowed to win. So with that being said, yeah, I wasted about a minute of this video just talking about that. I am so sorry, but seriously, All Might would walk into Nezu's office as he would proceed to have a conversation with Nezu. He would ask Nezu, if there's any possibility for Bakugo to be let back in. Maybe they don't even have to let him back into the hero course. Bakugo could be let back into general studies. And if he shows that he is ready to come back, they can maybe let him back in. You'd begin to explain the situation to Nezu and say that Deku himself didn't want Bakugo to get expelled. He may have done that to him, but, ultimately, it was the one, Deku was the one who had that happen to him. It wasn't Nezu who got, tortured in the way that Deku did. And if Deku's willing to forgive him, why should Nezu feel any different? Nezu would tell All Might that he understands his sentiments and that he knows that, he's coming from this because, well, that is one of his students along with Mirio, but he doesn't know if he can just let somebody back in who shows signs of villainy. To which All Might would step in and say, well, what if we don't, what happens if we don't, raise this kid right? What happens if we don't give him the chance to, be shown the light? We wouldn't be a great hero school after all if we weren't able to guide our students to the right path. As Nezu would begin to think about this, he would then tell All Might that he's right and that they're going to be letting Bakugo back into the hero course as, the normal UA courses. As literally, it's at this moment that Bakugo would basically just be walking around in his, walking around town as he's basically taking one of the wrong turns in an alleyway, right? Bakugo would basically just be looking around for areas as at this point he gave up on being a hero. Bakugo would basically just be wandering as he would see some guy with black hair, plenty of scars, and blue eyes. As he would look towards his direction, he would basically walk over to him and Dabi. Yes, Dabi would be committing a couple of crimes all on his own. As he would proceed to essentially talk to Bakugo, Bakugo would basically just get to know Dabi a little bit, and he would smile as Dabi would tell him what he's been, planning and all the things he's been up to. Bakugo would proceed to look at Dabi as he would say, all that, over these small little things. These low-life crooks weren't even worth killing. As Dabi would basically say that they were annoying, so they got what they deserved. And Bakugo would say that he knows a thing or two about annoying pests. As he'd proceed to talk a little bit to Dabi, and after a while, he would end up basically telling Dabi that, he seems like a cool guy. Maybe they can stay in contact or something. Maybe Bakugo would join along. As Dabi would tell Bakugo that maybe, but, he doesn't even know if some kid is strong enough. As Bakugo would show off his explosions and lunge at Dabi, as Dabi would realize that Bakugo is actually the real deal. He's pretty powerful in his own right. Dabi would tell Bakugo that with a little bit of training, he might just be strong enough. And Bakugo would proceed to basically go home that same day. He would look at his emails as he would get something from Principal Nezu, and he would be told that he's going to be let back into UA in the general course. And that if he can prove himself to be worthy of going back to the hero course, they will allow him to go back. But for that, he needs to prove himself. Bakugo, as soon as he sees that, he would think that this is his chance. He can still become a hero. As he would proceed to basically accept immediately, even though he just did a couple of things, a couple of shady things. He would still accept and keep Dabi's number in the back burner. He would never meet Dabi that day that he was promised. And he would go to UA and see Deku, as Deku was, pretty much just walking by after everything had happened, and it had been a couple of days. Now on this day, it would be the day of the USJ, as Deku would basically be proceeding to just be walking around with Uraraka, as they would both be talking to each other about some things. Bakugo would walk up to Deku and he would thank him for talking to All Might and, All Might talking to Nezu, as Deku would say that it was no problem and that, it was his fault partially for never showing off his powers. If only he would have shown them, then maybe Bakugo wouldn't have had all of this happen to him. And at this point, Deku would proceed to essentially just look at Bakugo, as he would basically tell him that he's glad he came back to his senses, as he'd basically walk on the bus, and this is when they would all go to the USJ, as everything would basically play out as you would expect it to. Everybody would go onto the bus and they would have their normal conversations, with Bakugo being out of the picture. And this is when they would basically arrive to the USJ. All the students would get out of their buses respectively, and they would proceed to essentially just walk over to the areas that they're gonna be working at. As they would get down, Deku, I almost said Naruto, but Deku would proceed to essentially get off the bus, as immediately he just senses so much malicious intent coming off from the USJ building. As immediately Deku just goes up to Aizawa and tells him that he feels some bad presences inside there. Aizawa would immediately push that thought out of his mind, and he would proceed to basically just tell Deku that, he shouldn't worry too much about it, that maybe it's not a big deal. To which Deku would basically just say that to tell Aizawa to be on guard and to not close the door behind them. As Aizawa would basically look towards Deku, and he would just be thinking that, what does this kid know? There was nobody in there. 13's in there right now. They should be fine. They'd walk inside. 13 would give her speech, and Kurogiri would arrive. To which immediately he would proceed to shoot his warp gate straight at the students. But as soon as he does, Deku would point his hand out at Kurogiri and suck him away. He would teleport him elsewhere, as Kurogiri would arrive at, literally in Antarctica. As he would be looking around, he'd be wondering what happened. Kurogiri would be down below with Nomu, as he would say, "Nomu, attack that brat." As the Nomu would immediately blitz towards Deku and shatter his ribs from the left side. As Deku didn't see it coming, Deku would be flung into a wall, and this is when Aizawa and 13 would jump into action. As Aizawa would disable the Nomu's quirks, 13 would use her black hole quirk to essentially warp the Nomu away, as this would actually end up causing Aizawa to get mangled even worse than he was in canon. See, what happened was 13 would basically just be warping away Aizawa and the Nomu, because, her gates aren't exactly the most efficient, perfect things in the world. She would have actually ended up warping away one oh my god. She would have essentially, okay, I need to explain this a little better. I am doing this awfully. I'm sorry, boys. Your boy a little tired. I just got back from Cali, and all those pre-recorded videos just have me on edge. Okay, as I was saying, I need to explain this a little better. See, as soon as the Nomu rushed at Deku and punched him away, 13 and Aizawa would have immediately sprung into action. Aizawa would activate his erasure quirk, and the Nomu's rest of the abilities, such as regeneration and all that stuff, would have gone away. The Nomu's strength in and of itself would remain the same though, and it would have started to essentially punch Aizawa, as it would have literally shattered Aizawa's left jaw, and it would have just started smashing Aizawa into the concrete, as it would begin to break and mangle some of Aizawa's bones. 13 would stand behind the Nomu, as she would begin to warp the Nomu away, but as she warped the Nomu away, the Nomu almost took Aizawa with him, and Aizawa had to use every last fiber of his being to not be taken by it, which would have actually caused Deku to barely be able to, move his hand and move it towards Aizawa's direction, as he would barely have it so that Aizawa wasn't pulled away with the black hole. The Nomu would be taken away, and Aizawa would be laying there on the ground unconscious, as all of the villains would proceed to essentially swarm into the direction of the hero students, as 13 would have immediately told the students to break down that door and leave now, that she's going to stay behind and hold them off for as long as she can, but she cannot have any students getting hurt. They need to run as fast as they can and call for backup immediately, as it's after this that Kurogiri's gone. If the villains don't get this now, they'll never get that chance, and All Might's not even around, so Shigaraki has no real escape from this situation. This is when out of nowhere a black portal would emerge, as this would be one All For One himself. He would teleport Shigaraki out of there before anything can happen, and the rest of the small fry villain would be handled by all of the hero students who wanted to help 13 out. So the students would essentially take out as many villains as they can but they would start getting overwhelmed due to the amount of villains that they were having to face. I mean, even though some of these students were powerful, they're not that strong in their own right, and against this many villains, they just simply couldn't do it. Todoroki was doing the best that he can, but without Bakugo, there was no way they were gonna beat these guys without suffering major injuries. So a lot of the students would have actually ended up getting hurt way worse, and Deku would have actually had to sit there and watch it with tears in his eyes, screaming no, as his fellow classmates were just getting absolutely destroyed. And as this was happening, Deku's meter would have immediately skyrocketed to 100, as he would immediately blitz in front of the villains, his eyes just clear white, and the shot would be that of Mob whenever he goes to his Mob Psycho 100 mode, as he would proceed to destroy each and every single one of the villains respectively. He would destroy them all and warp them all into prisons, as they would all be taken away. Deku would then proceed to fall out of that state, and he would fall out into unconsciousness, as what's it called, recovery girl would come in, and she would have her work cut out for her. They would start doing healing on the rest of the students and such, and Deku would be in a pretty bad condition. As when Deku's in the hospital, his mother Inko would of course come in to check up on him, and she would ask Deku how all of this happened. He should have been strong enough to avoid all of this. Deku would look at his mom, as he would say that he didn't know if that was the right situation to use his powers. He didn't know. As Inko would look at her son, she would immediately go down onto her knees, as she would begin to sob and say that she doesn't want to see him like this. She would begin to explain to Deku that that's not what she meant. She doesn't mean hide away your powers and don't show your gifts. What she means is don't sit there and flash it off in the way that Bakugo would do it. She didn't want Deku to turn out in the way that Bakugo did, and that's why she told him what she did. Deku would immediately understand what his mother means, and this is when Deku would immediately aim his hand at himself, as he would begin to heal himself. Deku would then proceed to essentially stand up and go to the rest of his classmates, as he would say, "I understand." Immediately, this is when Deku would proceed to essentially open a portal to the location of All for One. Oh wait, no, Mob can't do that, because Mob's not that broken. He can't do that ability with the people who kidnapped his brother. I doubt Deku can do that with Shigaraki. So retcon that part. I was making this man Deku way too OP for a second. But no, seriously, Deku would proceed to unravel all of his bandages and look at his classmates, as he would tell them all that they need to start training to be ready for the next time. As they would all go to Dagoma Beach, as well as Bakugo. He would invite Bakugo, and they would all start training, to which Bakugo would show signs of being different. Bakugo would also go to Nezu's office, as he would tell Nezu what he had done during that time that he was in the hero school. That he actually met a villain by the name of Dabi, and maybe, just maybe, they can use that to their advantage to find the location to the League of Villains. Maybe there's some correlation between the League and Dabi. So Bakugo would try to hit up Dabi a couple of times, and he would meet Dabi a couple days later, to which Bakugo would tell Dabi that he's sorry he couldn't meet him that day. He was busy with other things, as Dabi would say, yeah, alright. They would have a little bit of a conversation, and Bakugo would basically bring up the League of Villains that attacked the UA, and he would say that those guys definitely were very uncoordinated, as Dabi would say that he can say that again. If he would have done that, there's no way he would have been taken down that easily, as those small fry. And Bakugo would say that that's damn straight, as they'd basically both look at each other, and they'd both in tandem just agree that they both could have done way better jobs in terms of organizing that attack. Bakugo would talk to him as if, he was still down bad, and yes, I just said down bad. And they would proceed to essentially just go through with, talking to each other and pretty much just giving each other the run around and with what they've been up to. As it's at this point that Deku and the rest of the gang are pretty much training during the 2-week training arc that they have. During this time, that would all basically go by, and they would all return back to class, to which they would all essentially get suited up, and they would all get ready in their UA attires. As they would all basically just put on their little outfits, they would go to class, and this is when they would all basically just be swarmed by people from class 1B and the general course who want to, look at class 1A and what they're like. As you know, Monoma would do his thing, Deku wouldn't really say a thing, and since there's no Bakugo, they wouldn't ever say, you guys are all extra. So yeah, there'd be none of that stuff happening. Instead, Bakugo would be amongst the crowd standing in their way, and he would nod his head towards Deku, to which Deku would understand and he would nod it back. As he would walk away with Uraraka and Ida, and it's at this point that they would all be getting ready to go to the UA Sports Festival. They would go there, and this is when Deku would actually be told that he's going to be giving the speech, to which Deku would go to the podium, and immediately, as soon as he stands there, he would just stand there looking shy. He would just say that, as he would just continue doing that until Midnight would say, what he's trying to say is, everybody do their best, go plus ultra, as Deku would say, yeah, and everybody would just be like, yeah, that kid's weird. As Deku would just be feeling pretty bad for that horrible performance he just did. Bakugo would, give him palm himself in the face, and he would just say that if it was him up there, he probably would have said something along the lines of, he's going to win and that there's no hope for anybody else. As yeah, that's definitely something Bakugo would have done, but it's not Bakugo, it's Deku. So yeah, that being said, Deku would basically proceed to look at Bakugo as he'd say, yeah, he's right. And this is when the race would start. Immediately, Deku would blitz over to the location of the end of the race. And this is when everybody would basically just be fighting for second place. Deku would just sit down as he would end up creating a pop soda can, and he would get a bag of chips. He would just start eating away, and he'd basically just be sitting as everybody's wondering where that kid is at. And this is when some people in the crowd would basically say, look, he's there, he already won, and he's eating snacks. As what's it called, our boy, what's his name, President Mike, our boy President Mike would be like, incredible, Izuku Midoriya, first place, he gets a total of 10 million points. And this is when everybody would realize that Deku was gone. They'd realize how strong he was, and Todoroki would immediately just be thinking that he's going to have to bring his A game if he's going to want to beat this kid. As Deku would just be standing in the front of everything, everybody would be wondering what's going on. And next, we're going to jump into the cavalry battle, to which the teams are actually going to be as they were in canon. Deku, Uraraka, this time he would actually be with Ida, so no Tokiyami, and Mei. Now, actually, yeah, let's say Tokiyami, since Mei Hatsume doesn't necessarily have to be on the team. So yeah, Tokiyami. As soon as everything starts, Deku would basically just create a telekinetic force field in front of them, preventing anybody from harming them. That includes Todoroki. So in terms of that would pretty much just be a moot point. There'd be no real reason to cover that. So now we're going to jump on into the next battles, which is Deku versus Shinso. Immediately, as soon as the battle would start, Shinso would yell something out to Deku, as Deku would immediately just know that he should not say an absolute word to Shinso. He would rush towards Shinso's direction, and Shinso would continue to yell stuff at Deku. And Deku would immediately just break. He would say, "You can't talk like that about my friend," as he would be under mind control. And immediately, before anything can happen or Shinso can say walk off, Deku would snap right out of it, as Deku would say that that's a pretty handy technique. Deku would look towards Shinso as he would say walk away, as Shinso would immediately turn around and walk off the stage. Deku would then go into the changing room, or waiting room, I guess you could say, as he'd begin waiting for the next battles, or the next match, I guess you could say. As he'd basically just be sitting there with Uraraka as he tells her to do her best. And she would actually be facing against, who should she be facing up? She will be fighting, I don't know, whoever Uraraka fights, she's basically going to lose against, because everybody who made it this far can essentially whoop Uraraka. So there's really no real point to cover this. So yeah, Uraraka still loses, and she's still sad. Ida's brother still unfortunately gets mangled by the hero killer, and everything basically goes as it does in canon. Shoto would still challenge Deku, and Bakugo wouldn't even be around to be allowed into the general studies or the UA stuff, seeing as general studies kids just weren't allowed. So yeah, or no, actually Bakugo definitely would be there. So Todoroki would challenge Bakugo, and Bakugo, yeah, I'm thinking Bakugo should definitely be allowed, since if Mei Hatsume could get in from the general course, then I think Bakugo would definitely do it as well with the training he's been doing with Deku. Yeah, Bakugo's definitely still in the race for contending in what's going to happen. So yeah, that being said, Deku would proceed to essentially look at Todoroki as Todoroki declares war on Deku. Deku would look at Todoroki as he would tell him that, he's going to win that battle and that, Todoroki's not going to be able to do a thing about it. Todoroki would look at Deku as he would say, we'll see about that. And he would walk off as Bakugo would be standing in the doorway saying, don't write me off yet, half and half. As he'd basically walk off and say, whatever, reject. Bakugo would crunch up his fist and Deku would just hold his hand out as he shakes his head no. And Bakugo would understand this gesture. After this, Deku would basically just be told by Bakugo to wipe the floor with that kid. And Deku would nod his head as he would stand outside, and immediately, as soon as the battle starts, Todoroki would shoot ice at Deku, to which Deku would immediately wave his hand as the ice would melt down into water. And Todoroki would be shocked at what just happened, as Deku would immediately say walk off. Todoroki would immediately just be taken over subconsciously, and he would walk off the stage. As Deku immediately would take off the mind control, Todoroki would get enraged by the fact that Deku did that, and he would shoot a blast of fire right at Deku, to which Deku uses telekinetic abilities to shoot it back at Todoroki, which would burn him and send him straight to Recovery Girl. After that, we are now going to be covering Deku versus Bakugo. But if you Okay, so before we start this part off, I am going to be having to give a little bit of a breakdown for what happened on the last part. It's been about 5 days since the last part, so I definitely think you guys deserve a little bit of a recap just due to, everything that's happened. So if you guys can remember, Bakugo was let back into school due to Deku convincing All Might and you guys voting on the poll. And he was even able to meet Dabi, not Deku, but Bakugo was able to meet Dabi, and essentially just Bakugo was able to meet Dabi, and this is going to have major ramifications for the series later on, due to the fact that Dabi is going to be somebody that Bakugo knows, and that's just going to lead to an even faster takedown of All for One. So with that being said, make sure you guys go get your snacks and everything, because we're about to get started, and you guys are gonna love it. Oh, also, Deku was about to fight Bakugo in the last part, so yeah. In the UA Sports Festival, by the way, just in case you guys are thinking anything otherwise. But yeah, that's basically what we're gonna be doing. All right, so as I said, after the battle with Todoroki and Todoroki was sent to Recovery Girl, Deku would basically just be looking at Bakugo, who was sitting in the stands, as Bakugo would basically just nod at Deku. Deku would do the same, as immediately Deku would go into the waiting room, and this is when Bakugo and Deku would just both be preparing themselves mentally for the battle ahead of themselves. Seeing as, well, they haven't done anything like this in a while, and, they haven't fought against one another for quite a long time, so they kind of don't know what they're doing in terms of everything right now. So yeah, that being said, Bakugo would basically just be getting himself mentally ready for the fight that's about to happen, and Deku would just be deciding whether he's going to go all out on Bakugo and give him that sort of respect, or whether Deku should let it be a better fight, a good fight. Deku at the end would basically just decide on one of the options, and this is when they would be outside on the stage. Bakugo would look towards Deku's direction as he would say, "Go all out, Deku. Don't hold anything back." Deku would say, "I wasn't planning on it." As Bakugo would smile, and he would then look at Deku, to which Deku would look at him, and they would both basically just hear the people present mic saying, "Ready, 3, 2, 1." Immediately, Deku would proceed to move his hand, and Bakugo would just be full on as he would go crashing into the wall. But before Bakugo would be able to hit it, he would propel himself into the air, as he would then say, "AP shot," blasting at Deku's direction. As Deku would smile and saying that, that's Bakugo for you. As Deku would immediately turn his finger, the AP shot would blitz back at Bakugo, and it would start going through him, just leaving battle scars on him. As he would just start using it in the way that, the guy from Guardians of the Galaxy uses his little arrow thing. He would just start hitting Bakugo in that way until Bakugo just gets worn down, and Bakugo would then proceed to say enough, as he would blast an explosion at Deku's direction. Deku would literally proceed to basically blow at the air, as the explosion would propel right back at Bakugo. Bakugo would just be knocked out immediately, and this would lead into Deku being the winner of the festival. As soon as Deku wins, Inko, who was actually in the stage, would actually jump on over everything and would just rush to hug Deku. As she would basically look at Deku and just say that she's so proud of him for finally understanding what she meant. She would say that, she's glad that he's becoming a fine hero. And Deku would smile at her. She would say that it's all thanks to her that he is. And Inko would basically look at Deku and she would say that, no, this is your hard work, not mine. As Deku would smile, and everybody in the crowd would be like, who is this lady? To which Deku would just basically say, it's my mom. Everybody would just start laughing, and this is when Uraraka would rush out and hug Deku as well, to which people would be like, ooh, I see what's going on. Deku would then proceed to walk away with his mom and Uraraka, and they would go out to get some celebratory dinner. To which the very next day, they would all basically go back to class, and it's on this day where they're all told that they're going to be having to pick their hero names. Deku would pick the name of the psychic hero, Mob Psycho, as everybody would actually think that that name is actually pretty impressive. They're kind of surprised by the fact that he thought of that all on his own. Deku would say that he didn't. His mom actually gave him the idea. And he would then look towards Uraraka's, and she would basically tell everybody that, yeah, she also helped pitching in with, coming up with the name. As, everybody would just be like, huh, must be nice, as everybody else's name and stuff like that would be as everything was in the original. Now, Deku would of course still end up going with Gran Torino, just due to the fact that All Might is still low-key Deku's teacher. So if All Might was to, tell Deku that, he should go with somebody, Deku's not going to think twice before trusting All Might, because All Might has never led him astray, so why should he ever think that now? So yeah, Deku's going to go with Gran Torino, and in terms of Bakugo, he's still going to go with Best Genius, except this time, he's actually going to be getting a little bit of experience other than just learning how to be a hero and, kind of being told by Best Genius that, he needs to comb his hair and wear jeans all the time on everything. Jeans on jeans on jeans. Best Genius drip is low-key, so weird. Imagine seeing somebody dressed like that IRL. I feel like if I was to ever see somebody dressed like Best Genius, I would immediately just start roasting them. I would just go crazy. Their career, it would just be over after I get the first word out. I mean, unless there's some roast god and they just clap back at me, then, it's GG for them, because, it's like, come on, bro. I know I didn't just catch you wearing that outfit right now. But, yeah, that being said, I'm getting off on a tangent. So, yeah, essentially that's what pretty much ends up happening in terms of the events for, what internships everybody ends up going to. Uraraka would still go with Gunhead, and they would all basically just be vibing. Deku would be with Gran Torino, and I'm not going to lie, Gran Torino would basically just be telling Deku that there's really not much he can teach him. He would tell Deku that, in terms of his abilities, he's second to none. If he was to be honest with himself, he could probably take down All Might with the just moving his hand. And Gran Torino would tell him that due to that, what they're going to be focusing on today is his physical body. He's going to get trained to take a hit even more than he already has, and he's even going to train his reaction speed. Yep, a little similar to my What If Deku Had the 8 Gates, because they're both pretty OP in their own rights, but Deku's also going to have to be training on his body just due to the fact that he's not as physically ripped as anybody else. So yeah, Deku would definitely just be having a pretty decent time in terms of what he's doing for the moment. So yeah, it's pretty much what Deku does with Gran Torino, and this would lead us into the Hosu City incident, to which I honestly forget whether I captured Shigaraki or not, but I am pretty sure that Shigaraki did end up getting captured, just due to the fact that I don't know, was Shigaraki captured? The fact that I forgot this, hold on guys, give me a second, I gotta go check, because if I don't, I'm gonna get told by everybody that, oh, didn't you say Shigaraki was, and yep, not having it. Okay, yeah, I'm pretty sure Shigaraki actually did get away, just due to the fact that I looked at my script and I saw that, all the events that happened prior with Deku basically just failing to use his powers due to him being afraid. But yeah, Shigaraki's still out there. So yeah, I'm gonna say that all the normal events with the Nomu and all that stuff ends up happening, except this version of Deku would immediately, before anything could happen whatsoever, Deku would literally just hold his hands up in the air, as he would immediately just start sensing around everybody in the area of Hosu, as he would just start sensing all the negative actions, emotions, and thoughts that are going around him. As this one immediately, he would sense that Stain was about to cripple Ida for life by basically just destroying Ida's spinal cord. And immediately, Deku would snap his fingers as Stain would just get knocked out. Deku would then basically teleport over to all of the Nomus, each one by one, just individually, and he would just proceed to have them all compress into one another, as they would all basically just get sucked into a tiny black hole. Deku would then proceed to just say that, maybe if things were different, he wouldn't have had to do that. But as things stand, there was no other choice. And Gran Torino would just be shocked. He would be like, this kid is too powerful. What would have happened if he would have become a villain? There would have been nobody alive who could have stopped him. And yeah, Gran Torino, you are absolutely right. If this version of Deku was to become a villain, you would have had no hope. Like none. Like it would have just been a GG series. Like absolutely no hope. But yeah, that being said, Deku would then proceed to go back to Gran Torino as he would fix the bus, and he would then start healing everybody in the area who got hurt or damaged. And this would lead into the Hosu City incident barely ever being covered on the news. A lot of people wouldn't even know that it even happened, and Deku would get all the praise. He would not be told that to give it to, Endeavor, seeing as Endeavor wasn't even arriving by the point that Deku stopped everything. The explosions, yeah, that stuff didn't happen. The worst thing that happened was the train. So yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of what happened for the training arc. This means that Deku was actually able to continue training with Gran Torino for a couple extra days, and this would have led into Deku getting a little bit more toned out in terms of his body, and also kind of being afraid of Gran Torino just due to the fact that he got that same treatment that All Might did so many years ago. And as soon as Deku went back to class and All Might saw how Deku was in terms of like his body and stuff, All Might was just like, he gave you that treatment, and Deku was just like, yeah, he did. And All Might would just start laughing as he would say, ho, 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 ho. That was cringy. And, basically Deku would look at All Might as he would say, so, that's why you reacted like that when I mentioned his name. All Might would basically say that, yeah, he still has night terrors about how Gran Torino trained him back in the day. Deku would say that he can see why. And All Might would then begin to basically just start chuckling with Deku. As they would both basically just keep talking about how the internship happened, Deku would then see Uraraka come over to him, and she would begin to basically be pretty hype about her experience. She would tell Deku that, the thing that she did with Gunhead and the martial arts was so awesome. She got to learn so much from a pretty good fighter. And Deku would be just happy to hear that Uraraka is doing some pretty cool things. It's at this point that Deku would look towards All Might, and All Might would basically look at Deku as he gives him a little bit of a stare, telling him, come on, you gotta ask the girl out. With Deku just basically looking at All Might going red, as immediately he would look towards Uraraka as he would say, hey, Uraraka, I was kind of wondering if you wanted to maybe go out. And Uraraka would say, sure, like the other day. Deku would look at her as he would say, like a date. And Uraraka would immediately just start floating in the air, as Deku would just say, oh no, did I do something wrong? Deku would immediately heal her, as he could see that she's just fine. There was nothing wrong with her. All Might would just start laughing, and Deku would just be freaking out, wondering what he did wrong, as All Might would say that she's just excited probably, and that's just her quirk reacting to her emotions. As Deku would say that he hopes she is, he would ask her if she wants to go, and Uraraka would say that yes, she is so down to go with Deku. To which Deku would basically smile, and he would say, great, I'll pick you up at 8. Uraraka would say, you can drive? Deku would say, no, I'll just teleport to you, and we can just go straight to wherever you want to go. Uraraka would say, sure, that sounds fun. And after this, Deku would go over to Uraraka's place later in the day, getting all dripped out. Our boy Deku would definitely, I feel like this version of Deku, just due to the fact of how he is, he would definitely dress up in more of a dressier way, and he would definitely take her out in like a more fancy place, I guess you could say, just due to his mom. I feel like this version of Deku would low-key get dressed by his mom, so excuse me for the drip attire that I'm going to be giving him. Deku would actually, no, this is actually going to be kind of heat. Deku would be wearing a white button up, can't go wrong with the white button up ever. He'd be wearing his dad's watch, it was given to him by him on his birthday, and he would be wearing a bow. Yep, a black bow with black pants and black shoes and a belt. Honestly, I can't picture it right now all in my head, but I feel like it might be cool. So yeah, that's Deku's drip in terms of, you know, what he's going to be wearing for the day. Uraraka would just be wearing, you know, a really cool dress, and they would both basically meet up together at Uraraka's house, where Deku would teleport straight in her room, and Uraraka would be like, "Whoa, you could have knocked." Deku would say that, "Oh, right, sorry, I teleported to the wrong place. I meant to do it outside." Uraraka would say that it's fine, and Deku would then look at her as he would say that she looks really good today. Uraraka would go red in the face, and they would go on a little mini date or whatever. Now, it's after all of these events where, you know, they're then going to go back to class, and they're going to then basically just go over the finals race and everything. Ida would go up to Deku as he would thank him for saving him back there with Stain, and Deku would say not to mention it, that he would have done the same thing for him, but telling Ida and scolding him about what he did with Stain, telling Ida that he should never do something like that ever again. Stuff like that. Being a hero isn't about getting vengeance or, you know, doing things for yourself. Being a hero is about being selfless and saving people's lives, not getting revenge on people who hurt your brother. Your brother was still alive, and you may not have survived that encounter with Stain. So next time you got to think about what you're doing, class rep. As Ito would basically tell Deku that he's right, and Deku would then say not to sweat it, as everything turned out good in the end, right? Ito would say yeah, and this is when they would both basically just continue on with their day, as they would be told about the little finals, about the race that they're going to be having to find All Might and save him, the rescue hero race, as Deku would just teleport over to All Might and save him. And this is when we're now going to skip on over to the finals, which is a little bit boring, honestly. The finals doesn't really have too much content for anything at all. Deku and Uraraka would continue going on other couple of dates, and seeing as this version of Deku likes to take it slow, there's no studying done yet. You know, they still haven't hit the books that hard yet. As you know, Deku and Uraraka still, you know, in the dating stage. You know, they barely started dating, and I'm just gonna say that at this point, Deku, I'm not gonna lie, I don't know what I'm gonna say. Deku would basically proceed to just go into class one day where they would all be told about their finals and all that stuff. And, you know, they would all basically just be told to study for a week, as Deku and Uraraka would just go on dates, as I said. And in terms of the tests, Deku would ace it. Come on, our boy Deku is smart. Our boy Deku is big brain. So, yeah, Deku would definitely do great in terms of that portion. And in terms of, sorry, you know, had to clear my throat real quick. Pause. In case any of you guys were like, where were you clearing it from? Because I can just feel like some of you guys are probably going to comment something like that down below. But no, seriously, all jokes aside, Deku would proceed to basically walk in there, as he would see that they're all going to be fighting against teachers. But when Deku has to fight against All Might with Bakugo on his team, they would actually be a pretty great combo. And in terms of fighting All Might, Deku just completely wipes the floor with him. I'm sorry, but like, I know All Might's powerful and all, but Mob would completely wipe the floor with All Might. Like, even if it was Prime All Might and you like gave him a power of times 100, Deku would still just destroy All Might. Like, there's no if, ands, or buts to it. It's just as simple as All Might. You know, you may be powerful, but you know, Deku's god tier. You know, the man don't play no games. So yeah, that's basically how that whole stuff ends up happening. And now we are finally going to be able to cut on over to the forest training area. Now, it's during this time where they're all basically told to get on the bus, and they're all told that they're going to need to go get their stuff. As the mall incident would happen, except this version of Deku would go off with Uraraka, so Shigaraki would never actually end up grabbing Deku all by himself, and that would never happen as a situation in a whole. Shigaraki would still be upset about Stain, but he wouldn't really be able to do anything to Deku just because of that. And this would lead us into all of them being in the bus, just kind of messing around until they arrive at the location that they got dropped off at. And they would all basically just be told by the Wild Pussycats that they are going to have to go to that area from this area. Deku would immediately look at her as he would say, okay, we'll go, as he knew exactly what they were trying to do. Deku would immediately just teleport everybody in Class 1A over to the area, including the teachers and Aizawa, and he would say, all right, we're here. And, you know, they would all just kind of facepalm as they would say, dude, it was supposed to be a challenge. Deku would say, no. And, you know, this is when they would all basically just look at each other. They're like, I mean, I guess you guys are going to start your normal training now. And, you know, the first day they would have their normal training. And that's essentially how the forest training arc stuff is going down for the moment, for the time being. Now, this is when they would all basically have their normal events, just like in canon, such as the sauna incident, or no, not sauna. I don't think it's a sauna. I think it was like hot springs, and Mineta still would have been a creep like usual, just because Mineta's always gonna be Mineta. Like that's just never stopped. Climbs walls are meant to be climbed. A great quote by Mineta. It's definitely true, but it doesn't apply to all scenarios. So that being said, Mineta still tries to climb, and Deku still, ends up, catching Code after he falls. And Code ends up, telling Mineta to get away from the girls. As, Mineta falls, and he would get knocked out unconscious, just like, our normal Mineta. And, yeah. Okay, so we pick off the story right after where I had left off yesterday. See, everything basically starts the very next day. As everybody's just going through their normal training, Deku is training in the same way that it was in the original, fighting against the guy member of the Wild Wild Pussycats, and Deku would basically just proceed to do that training during the whole entire time. This would basically lead into Deku being very tired by the end of the day, and by the end of everything, Deku's hair was just a fluffy mess. As by the end of everything, Uraraka would have walked over to him just like wheezy, and like she would go up to Deku, as Deku would look at Uraraka and say, "Hey, you feeling okay?" Uraraka would look at Deku and she would say, "No, I'm not." As Deku would look at Uraraka, he would proceed to start laughing as she would say, "Not funny, Deku." Deku would look at Uraraka as he would say, "I mean, it's a little bit funny." Uraraka would look at Deku as she low-key, like, she's feeling a little pressed, not gonna lie. But, what's she gonna do? As afterwards, Deku would say, okay, I'm sorry. As Uraraka and Deku would basically just look at each other and they would go lay down, as they're both just straight tired. Deku, he definitely got whooped a little too for a couple of hours, and Uraraka was just throwing up left and right. She could not control her quirk. It's at this point where everything's basically going as you would expect, and they would basically have to cook their own food later in the night, as they would of course be making curry. It's at this point where Deku would notice that Koda was walking off, and Koda would basically just get followed by Deku. As Deku would follow over to Koda's direction, Uraraka would actually just stay back, as Deku would tell her that, she can just enjoy herself. Uraraka would do that, and it's at this point where Deku would basically proceed to essentially look towards Koda and where he was going. As Koda would see Deku following him, he would say, "What are you doing here, hero? Don't you have somewhere to be? Go back with the other wannabes." As Deku would look at Koda and he would sit down right next to him, as he would look towards him and just say, "Hey, I mean, I know what happened to your parents." As Koda would look at him and say, "Save it. I know you don't really care about me. Nobody understands what I'm going through." Deku would look at Koda as he would say, "I mean, I may not understand, but I can try to." Koda would look at Deku and just tell him that he doesn't need a hero. He needs his family, as he would start sobbing a little bit, and Deku would just walk away as he would just hear Koda crying. Deku would want to go back, and it's at this moment where Muscular would basically jump in and he would say, "Looks like I found a little runt by myself. Guess I got lucky." As Deku would hear that, and immediately Deku would rush over there, as he would see Koda just standing there frozen in fear by the presence of Muscular. Deku would immediately just push his hand, as Muscular would get punched off of the mountain, just like thrown off of the mountain by Deku's telekinetic abilities. And it's at this moment where Deku would just clap his hands, and he would then search around the areas. He would start feeling everybody's presences. Deku would feel the evil ones, and he would immediately snap his fingers as he would say, "I'm done with this." He would then proceed to blitz over to Dabi, as he would basically just grab him and ask him where the leader of the organization is at. And Dabi would tell him the location of the bar, telling him that he's not going to be able to do the thing to the boss. He's even more powerful than you could ever imagine. Deku would look at Dabi and tell him to save it, as he would just knock him out, and he would then blitz towards Aizawa. As he would teleport all the villains over to Aizawa, he would look towards him as he would just tell him that they're all going to be handled by him tonight. This ends today. Deku would then proceed to teleport to the bar, where he would just start looking around the area. He would see the TV and everything that's basically in their League of Villains hideout, and this is when he would actually see Kurogiri. As he would look towards Kurogiri, he would tell him that he needs to teleport the master here, to which All For One would be right behind him as he walked out of the gate, and he would shoot a tendril straight at one of Deku's sides. It would hit him right in the ribs as Deku would drop onto the ground and just begin to cough out blood. Deku would look at All For One as he would say, "How did you?" And All For One would then proceed to say, "Most impressive, Midoriya. It seems to me that All Might taught you well." He would say, "But it's time that I take that precious quirk of yours," as he would walk towards Deku and he would put his hand over Deku's head, as he would then use his ability to snatch quirks. As it's at this moment that All For One would realize that he just couldn't take Deku's quirk for some reason. Deku would feel fear for the very first time in his life, and he would then see that All For One looked upset. This is when All For One would kick Deku away and tell him, "Why can I steal your quirk?" And Deku would then say, "What are you talking about?" As he would cough out some blood onto the ground, All For One would then kick Deku like a rag doll, and Deku would just get kicked out of the building. As Deku would look towards All For One, he would then imprison him inside of a telekinetic wall, as All For One was basically just proceeded to break out using his aura. As it's at this point that Deku would look towards All For One and say that he doesn't know if he'll be able to use this attack and survive. And All For One would walk up to Deku slowly as he would say, "If I can't have your quirk, you're useless to me. Now die!" As he would shoot a giant attack that was meant to destroy All Might right at Deku, but before the attack can hit, Deku's meter would flash over to 100, and it's at this point that Deku's eyes would flash white, as he would start floating in the air, and he would block the attack by All For One, as Deku's whole aura and vibe would change in an instant, and he would immediately just have all of his injuries heal, as he would just teleport over to All For One, smile in his face, and look him right in his eyes, as All For One's body would go limp, and he would drop down to the ground, as Deku passed judgment upon All For One. It's at this point that Deku would basically just drop unconscious, and about a couple of hours later, people would locate the location of Deku and All For One due to the fight and the ruckus that it caused. As Deku would wake up in a hospital the very next day, he would be drained of energy, and Uraraka would be there at his bedside as she would say, "Morning, sleepyhead." Deku would look towards Uraraka as he would say, "What are you doing here?" Uraraka would look at Deku as she would basically just tell Deku that, he ended up having a pretty big fight yesterday and she just couldn't sleep. So she decided that she was going to sit by Deku's bedside. Deku would look at Uraraka as he would proceed to basically smile and, he would just hug her. As Uraraka would just basically just hug him back and she would kiss his head. As she would tell him not to worry her like that ever again. Deku would promise not to, and it's at this point where the rest of UA would basically be outside of Deku's room, including Bakugo, as they would just give him a couple of gifts and tell him that they heard about what happened. As Deku would just smile and they would say, "Yeah." As it's at this point that, he would heal for a couple of days, and this is when they would go take the provisional hero license exam, which Deku would of course pass, and this would then lead them all into meeting the big three, to which Deku basically just gets approached by Mirio, and Deku would of course end up whooping that man's cheeks. Like it was over before the battle started, to be honest. This version of Deku was just too OP. Mob's powers, even though Mob himself isn't that intimidating, if somebody else who had bad intentions was to have his powers, they could destroy the world in all honesty, and that's exactly what Deku has the power to do. So Mirio, yeah, he's not even a challenge. He doesn't even he's not even in the same league as Deku, to put it bluntly. And Deku would basically just wipe the floor with Mirio, as Mirio would tell him to go with Sir Night-Eye, but Deku would honestly just say that, he'd rather go with Gran Torino. He would go with Gran Torino, and it's at this point where they would basically be called by Sir Night-Eye's agency that they're going to be having a bust on this person known as Shisaki or Overhaul, as they would basically look at Deku, and Deku would be told that he's actually getting called by Sir Night-Eye himself. Deku would just basically get there and oh wait, no, retcon everything that I basically just said, because I forgot that in this version Mirio and Deku were actually kind of buddies in this version. So Deku and Mirio would have definitely ended up having a pretty good battle And Miria would have told Deku to come to his little internship place, as Deku would have done that, and they would have had the situation with Eri, to which there would not even be no raid. Deku immediately, upon seeing Eri's condition and the man walk out with his aura of just death, would immediately just take his quirk away, as Eri would just be sitting there, and Deku would wipe away all of those horrendous memories she had with Shisaki, as he would have replaced them with memories of her and him as her being his little sister. And Deku would just kind of do that, as he'd basically report to everybody what had happened, and he would single-handedly just wipe out the entire organization. As it's at this point that literally Principal Nezu would just tell Deku that he's just going to graduate early. There's no point for Deku to not be out there on the streets patrolling, as if he was out there, he would make 10 times the difference that All Might made, and Deku would actually be made a pro hero, with him actually getting a reward from Uraraka, if you know what I'm saying. This would lead into Deku essentially becoming a pro hero and helping Uraraka's parents out with their money problems, as well as his own family, and he would actually end up renting his own apartment, with Uraraka moving in and Deku becoming a pro hero way earlier than in the original canon, which would actually lead into Deku being known as the #1. His name was Mob Psycho, and Deku his whole life just went according to plan. Bakugo in this version of events would just kind of become friends with Deku on a later on date, and the big three of UA would be Todoroki, Bakugo, and Uraraka, as Deku ended up improving Uraraka's quirk by making it so that she can control all gravity. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, there's going to be a Gravity Deku dropping soon. So you guys are hyped for that? Definitely make sure to go down below and smash the like button, as well as, let your boy know what you thought about the what if Deku was born with Mob's powers. It has been your boy Zether. I hope you guys enjoy the movie, and I am out. Peace.